So a patent has several parts. Typically, the very first part of a patent is the actual title. And the title is actually very important because it'll look really good to people that are going through and searching and reviewing your patent portfolio. Having a good title might indicate to them what problem you're addressing, and it might be actually a very key part in how they begin to perceive your patent and its worth. Sometimes people also include inventors after the title. That's also stylistic. You do have to list the inventors when you file a patent, but some people don't like to put the inventorship in the application itself. Sometimes people like to include a section prior to the background section that's just a high-level technical field section. So this is one or two sentences that just describes this invention relates to the automotive industry or to electronics. It can be a very generic statement. Some people put two sentences in, largely dependent just on style and preference. The background section. And the background section describes the prior art. And I talked about it last week as well, but essentially the background section covers what existed before your invention. So this is going to talk about other people's, well, it's going to talk about the generic field that the application is about, but it's also going to talk about prior solutions and prior shortcomings with those prior solutions. Sometimes people cite other published and issued patents in the background section. Sometimes people keep it light. Sometimes people go into great depth. As a general guiding, just a general rule, we try to keep the description in the background section fairly minimal, because typically what we've been seeing is that examiners will cite what's called applicant admitted prior art in office actions. And what that basically means is that anything that you put in the background section typically is used against you. So what we generally recommend is to keep the background section, not to go too much into detail, because you don't want it to be used against you later down the road when your application is actually going through the prosecution process and the prosecution phase. After that, people get into the actual merits, and there's typically a summary section. And the summary section is a nice summary of what the invention is as claimed. And also sometimes people like to put various embodiments that describe in detail different ways of practicing the invention. And it's probably the first part that the examiner is going to read. And so it's a really, really useful tool. Now, after the summary section, there's typically a brief description of drawings. So this is one sentence that describes every drawing that's in the application. So if you have 10 figures, for example, you'll find 10 sentences where it will say something like figure 1 is a high-level diagram of a system. Now, after the brief description of drawings is typically the detailed description. And the detailed description gets really into the nitty-gritty and the real details of your invention. And typically it describes embodiments. Now, embodiments, each one represents a reduction to practice of your claimed invention. So it's for example, depending on what you're claiming, it's an actual description of one example of your claimed invention. And people can have multiple embodiments, so applications can actually get really long. So you can have multiple embodiments disclosed in one application, and that's typically why and how applications can get to be very long. So another big part of a patent are the drawings. The drawings are a great tool because it gives you the opportunity to describe to someone how to actually make and use your invention in pictures. So not with just words, but with actual pictures. So they can pick up the document without having to go through and read the text in detail. And hopefully they'll get some idea of what it is you're trying to protect, what your invention is, and what you're trying to claim. So it's a huge opportunity for time savings in explaining and conveying and communicating to others what your invention is. The detailed description describes in detail what are in the drawings, and typically reference numerals are used to identify various structures in the drawings. And the detailed description then goes through and explains the nuts and bolts of the drawings. The claims really are the most important part of a patent, and the patent claims describe the metes and bounds of the invention and what it is you're claiming you own. So this is covering the true metes and bounds of the scope of what you are claiming, of what your claimed invention is. And the reason why the claims are so important is because they're ultimately what gets examined by a patent examiner. So in the case of US patent examiner, they're going to review the claims and they're going to try to identify prior art that might make it so that your claims are not patentable, and you're going to have to respond to that. So that's why the claims are so important. They're both important during the examination phase because that's ultimately what you are trying to get protection for. And they're also important at the very end after this entire process because the claims define what you are able to exclude others from doing. And lastly, the abstract. The abstract is limited to 150 words. And I will tell you, the abstract is also really important for similar reasons as the title. So the abstract is a great opportunity for those in the 150 words to describe the essence of what your invention is, why it's so cool, why it's so valuable, and why you should actually go through, open the document, and understand what you're claiming and what your invention is.